I spent 15 years caring for the front lawn like it was a family legacy. Every morning at dawn, I watered it, trimmed the edges, and pulled out every single weed by hand. It was my pride, my connection to memories of my father, who taught me that a man's property reflects his integrity. But one morning, when I returned home after a 3-day work trip, I discovered something that made my blood boil. 2 deep tire tracks cut straight across the grass, soil churned up, blades crushed into the dirt. Someone had driven onto my property like it was their personal racetrack. And when I found the culprit, the most powerful neighbor in the area didn't just deny it. She turned me into the villain. But she didn't know I wasn't the type to let things slide. If you're watching this from anywhere, drop a comment below, because this story will show you exactly how I used hidden steel teeth beneath the grass to teach them a lesson about boundaries. The house sat on 2 acres at the end of Meadowbrook Lane, just outside the official HOA boundary, but close enough that the neighborhood always tried to pull me into their drama. I inherited it from my father 7 years ago after he passed from a heart attack. He'd lived here for 30 years, raised me here, and taught me everything about maintaining a home with dignity. After his funeral, I quit my engineering job in the city and moved back full-time. The place needed someone who understood what it meant to him. The lawn was thick, green, perfectly level. Neighbors used to stop and compliment it. Some even asked for my fertilizer schedule. So when I pulled into the driveway that Wednesday morning in early June, exhausted from a consulting gig 3 states away, and saw those twin scars carved into the lawn, I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. The tracks started near the street, cut diagonally across the center of the yard, then looped back toward the neighbor's driveway. They were deep, at least 3 inches down in some spots. Wide tires with aggressive tread patterns, the kind you'd find on a performance vehicle. Grass was torn up and scattered, soil dark and fresh. This wasn't an accident. No one accidentally drives across 50 feet of lawn in the middle of the night. This was deliberate, reckless, the act of someone who thought they could get away with it. I crouched down and ran my fingers through the torn earth. The soil was still damp from the automatic sprinklers, which meant this happened within the last day or so. Then I noticed the tracks led directly to and from the driveway next door, the Delacroix property. Karen Delacroix was the vice president of the Meadowbrook HOA, a retired high school teacher who had a reputation for running the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She had one son, Brandon, 23 years old, unemployed, still living at home, and Brandon had just bought himself a brand new Tesla 2 months ago, a sleek black Model 3 that he loved to show off. I didn't want to assume, but the evidence was right there in front of me. I walked next door and knocked on the front door at 7:30 in the morning. Karen answered, still in her bathrobe, her expression shifting from surprise to annoyance the moment she saw me. I kept my tone calm, respectful. I said, "Karen, I just got back from a trip and found tire tracks all over my lawn. They lead right to your driveway. I'm not accusing anyone, but I need to know if maybe Brandon drove through my yard by mistake." She stared at me for a long second, then called over her shoulder for Brandon to come to the door. When he appeared, he looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Karen didn't give him a chance to speak. She said, "Brandon didn't do anything. He's been home all week." Her hand reached out and rested on Brandon's shoulder, almost protective, almost possessive. She squeezed once, a signal I wasn't supposed to see. I said, "The tracks are pretty clear, Karen, and they lead right here." She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. She said, "They don't prove anything. For all I know, you drove across your own lawn and now you're looking for someone to blame. Brandon has a brand new car. Why would he risk damaging it by driving through dirt?" I glanced past her and saw the Tesla parked in the garage, the tires still covered in fresh mud, the same reddish-brown soil from my yard. I pointed and said, "His tires have mud on them. That's the same soil from my property." She didn't even look. She said, "That could be from anywhere. We had rain last week. You need to leave now. Maxwell, if you keep harassing my family, I'll have no choice but to report this to the HOA." I felt the anger rising, but kept it under control. I said, "I'm not harassing anyone. I'm trying to understand what happened to my lawn." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. She said, "Then maybe you should invest in better property maintenance." She closed the door in my face before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, processing what just happened. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She turned it around on me, made me the problem, and then threatened to use the HOA against me. And that hand on Brandon's shoulder, that squeeze, told me everything I needed to know. She knew exactly what her son had done. She just didn't care. I walked back to my house, my jaw clenched, knowing this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Within 48 hours, Karen had turned the entire situation on its head. Thursday morning, I woke up to find an email in my inbox, sent at 6:15 a.m. to what looked like the entire Meadowbrook HOA mailing list. The subject line read, "Safety concern regarding neighboring property owner." I opened it with a sinking feeling in my stomach. The email was written in Karen's precise, teacher-like tone, the kind that made you feel like you were being lectured even through a screen. She described how her son's vehicle had been damaged by an obstruction deliberately placed near a shared access point, and included 2 photos of Brandon's Tesla showing a small scratch on the rear bumper, maybe 3 inches long, barely visible unless you were looking for it. The way she framed it, with close-up lighting that made the scratch look deep and extensive. You'd think the car had been totaled. What she didn't include were any photos of the tires, still caked with mud from my property. The email went on to claim that I had aggressively confronted her family, making baseless accusations and refusing to take responsibility for the condition of my own property. She wrote, "While Mr. Thornhill's property is technically outside our HOA boundaries, his actions and negligence directly impact the safety and property values of our community. We have reason to believe the unmaintained access route along his lawn has been used by residents for over 20 years as a courtesy easement, and his recent placement of obstacles constitutes a violation of neighborly conduct and possibly a legal liability." I read that line 3 times, my jaw tightening with each pass. A courtesy easement. That was a complete fabrication. My father had lived here for 3 decades and never once allowed anyone to drive across the property. There was no historical access, no agreement, nothing. She was inventing a narrative out of thin air. By Thursday afternoon, I started noticing the shift. My next-door neighbor on the other side, a retired nurse named Patricia, usually waved when she saw me outside. This time, she looked away and went back inside. Another neighbor, a guy named Tom, whom I'd helped fix his fence last summer, drove past without acknowledging me. I checked my phone and saw a group message thread that I'd been added to months ago, the unofficial neighborhood chat. There were dozens of messages, most of them expressing concern about Karen's email. One person wrote, "I always thought Max was a nice guy, but you never really know someone." Another said, "If Karen says there's an issue, there's probably an issue. She's been on the board for years and taught half our kids." That last part explained everything. Karen wasn't just the vice president. She'd been their children's teacher, had organized community events, and had built relationships over decades. When she spoke, people listened. When she pointed, they looked. I felt the isolation creeping in, the way a community can turn on you without ever hearing your side of the story. I wanted to respond to the email to set the record straight, but I knew that would only make me look defensive. Instead, I started documenting everything. I went outside with my phone and took detailed photos of the tire tracks from multiple angles, showing the tread pattern and trajectory from the street to Karen's driveway. I measured the depth of the ruts with a tape measure, noted the width, and collected soil samples in labeled bags. Then I walked over to Karen's driveway and photographed the Tesla from the street, zooming in on the tires still caked with dried mud, the same reddish-brown color as my soil. I made comprehensive notes with timestamps, weather conditions, and everything that might matter later if this was going to escalate. I needed evidence that could stand up in court. Friday afternoon, I received a formal letter in the mail, delivered by certified mail, requiring my signature. It was from the Meadowbrook HOA, signed by Karen in her capacity as vice president. The letter stated that I was being asked to attend an emergency board meeting the following Tuesday to address ongoing disputes affecting community harmony. Attached was a petition, printed on official HOA letterhead, with 17 signatures from residents. The petition requested that I sign a voluntary agreement to pay $5,000 in damages to the Delacroix family for destruction of personal property, and agree to maintain a distance of at least 100 feet from their residence to prevent further harassment. I stared at the document, barely able to process what I was reading. $5,000, a restraining order by any other name, and 17 people, neighbors I'd lived near for years, had signed it without ever asking for my side of the story. I sat down at my kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of me, and felt the anger shift into something colder, sharper. Karen had weaponized her position and the trust the community had placed in her over decades. She'd pointed at me, and they'd followed without question. I thought about my father, about the way he'd taught me to stand up for what was right, to never back down when you knew the truth. I picked up my phone and called a lawyer I'd worked with years ago on a property dispute, a no-nonsense woman named Rebecca Sanderson. When she answered, I said, "Rebecca, I need advice on property law in Texas. Specifically, what are my rights when someone trespasses and then tries to claim I'm liable for their damage?" She listened as I walked her through the entire situation. The tire tracks, Karen's email, the petition, and the fabricated easement claim. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Max, this is textbook defamation and property rights violation. First, there's no such thing as a courtesy easement without documentation. If your father never granted access, and you've never granted access, that's your private property, period. Second, if someone trespasses and damages their own vehicle in the process, that's on them, not you. Texas law is very clear about this. You have every right to protect your property." I felt a weight lift slightly. I said, "What about the HOA petition? Can they force me to pay or stay away from my own neighbor?" She said, "Absolutely not. You're not even in their jurisdiction. They have no authority over you. But I'll be honest, Max, this kind of social manipulation can be harder to fight than a legal case. You need evidence, and you need it to be ironclad." I hung up and sat there for a long moment, thinking. Rebecca was right. I needed more than photos and measurements. I needed something that would make it impossible for Karen to twist the story. And then I remembered something my father used to say, that the best defense is a good offense, but only if you're smart about it. I spent the rest of the evening researching security camera systems, reading reviews, and comparing specs. I needed something with high resolution, night vision, cloud storage, something that couldn't be tampered with or erased. By midnight, I'd ordered a 4-camera system with 4K resolution and placed an order for something else, something I'd need to consult with an engineer about first. If Brandon came back, and I had a feeling he would, I was going to be ready. Karen thought she could bury me with paperwork and social pressure. She had no idea what was coming. The online attacks started Monday morning, 5 days after the petition arrived. I woke up to find my email inbox flooded with messages from addresses I didn't recognize, all sent between midnight and 3 a.m. The subject lines ranged from polite but pointed questions to outright hostility. "Why are you destroying our community?" one read. Another said, "Selfish people like you are what's wrong with neighborhoods." A third was more direct. "We know where you live. Max, be careful." By Tuesday afternoon, the harassment had moved beyond email. I started getting text messages to my cell phone, a number I'd only given to a handful of local contractors and the HOA office when I first moved in. The messages were anonymous, sent from disposable numbers or messaging apps that masked the sender's identity. "You think a fence will protect you," one said. "The community always wins in the end." I spent Tuesday evening systematically documenting everything. I created a master spreadsheet with columns for date, time, message type, content, and source information. Every email, every text, every piece of communication was logged with full metadata visible. I took screenshots of everything, saved them in dated folders, burned copies to 3 separate drives, and uploaded the entire archive to encrypted cloud storage. The threats weren't explicit enough to immediately involve law enforcement, but they were building a pattern. And I knew patterns would matter when this inevitably escalated further. I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was building a timeline that would be impossible to dispute. Wednesday evening, I was checking the security camera footage from the previous night when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. At 2:47 a.m., 2 figures in dark hoodies had approached my property from the street, faces completely obscured. They walked slowly along the edge of my lawn, stopped near the driveway, and one of them pulled out a phone, taking photos or video of my house. They stayed for 8 minutes, moving around the perimeter, pointing at windows, the garage, and the areas where my cameras were mounted. Then they left the same way they came. The footage was clear enough to show their movements, but not their faces or any identifying features. I saved it immediately across all my backup systems. This wasn't casual curiosity. This was reconnaissance, and whoever sent them knew exactly what they were doing. I called Rebecca the next morning and sent her everything. She reviewed the files, then said, "Max, this has crossed into criminal harassment and possible stalking. You need to file a police report immediately. This timeline will be critical if anything happens to your property or your safety." I drove to the station that afternoon and sat down with a detective named Martinez, a calm man in his mid-40s. I walked him through everything, from the tire tracks to the fabricated email to the threatening messages to the surveillance footage. I handed him a USB drive with all the evidence organized chronologically. Martinez reviewed the footage, made notes, and then looked at me. "Mr. Thornhill, this meets the threshold for criminal harassment. I'm opening a case file with incident number 23479. Keep documenting everything. If you receive more threats or anyone approaches your property, call 911 immediately. I'll also reach out to the HOA board and make it clear this behavior is illegal." That night, I checked the community group chat I'd been monitoring. Karen had posted a message earlier that day, carefully worded but unmistakably designed to provoke. "I've heard some of our neighbors have been expressing their frustration with the ongoing property dispute," she wrote. "I understand emotions are running high. Just remember, sometimes people need to see that their actions have consequences before they're willing to change." The post had 23 replies within 2 hours, most agreeing, some suggesting direct action. The speed made sense. Karen had taught many of their children, organized holiday events, and led fundraisers. When she spoke, especially about community threats, people responded immediately. One person wrote, "Maybe if he sees how serious we are, he'll reconsider." Another said, "We just need to stay united." I saved everything, every comment that crossed from opinion into veiled threat. The next morning, I received a notification that someone had tagged my address in a public neighborhood forum with the caption, "This is the house causing all the problems." The post included a photo of my front lawn taken from the street. Within hours, it had been shared 16 times, with comments ranging from disapproval to hostility. I reported it, documented it, and added it to my case file. Karen was building a digital mob, using social pressure and online anonymity to isolate me, to make me feel unsafe in my own home, but she was making a critical mistake. Every post, every message, every middle-of-the-night visit captured on camera was evidence. She thought she was intimidating me into backing down. What she was actually doing was constructing my legal case piece by piece, creating an unassailable record of organized harassment that would be impossible for her to explain away when the time came. The security cameras arrived Thursday morning, delivered in 3 heavy boxes that I carried into my garage one at a time. I spent the next 6 hours installing a 4-camera system, each one weatherproof with 4K resolution and infrared night vision capable of capturing clear images up to 100 feet in complete darkness. I mounted the first above my garage, covering the driveway and front approach, the second on the corner facing the street, the third aimed at the side yard where the tire tracks originated, and the fourth positioned to cover my entire lawn from an elevated angle. Each camera fed into a central recorder in my garage with automatic cloud backup that couldn't be tampered with or erased. Every frame was time-stamped down to the second, creating an unbreakable record of everything that happened on my property. While I was connecting the final cables, Rebecca called.
"Max," she said, "I've been going through Texas property law regarding protective measures on private land. I need you to listen carefully because this is important." I put her on speaker and kept working. She continued, "In Texas, you have the legal right to install non-lethal deterrents on your property to prevent trespassing and property damage, as long as they meet 3 conditions. First, they can't cause serious bodily harm. Second, they must be preceded by clear and visible warning signs. Third, they can only be placed on your own land, not on public easements or shared access. Tire deflation devices, also called spike strips, are used in parking enforcement and private lots all over the state. As long as you post warnings and they're designed only to puncture tires, not injure people, they're completely legal." I stopped what I was doing and sat down on my workbench. "You're saying I can install spike strips on my own lawn," I said slowly. Rebecca responded. "Yes, but you need to do it right. The strips have to be low profile, designed specifically for tire damage only. You need at least 3 warning signs posted at visible entry points, and you need to document everything: the purchase, the installation, the signage, all of it," I asked. "If someone drives over them anyway, after seeing the signs, what happens legally?" Rebecca didn't hesitate. "They're liable for their own damage. You warned them. They ignored the warning. They trespassed on private property. It's a textbook assumption of risk, and if they try to claim otherwise, your cameras will prove they saw the signs and chose to proceed." I hung up and immediately started researching. I found a company in Austin that manufactures low-profile tire spike strips for commercial parking lots. I called them and spoke to an engineer named Cole, who walked me through the specifications. These are spring-loaded steel teeth, 2 inches high, designed to compress under the weight of a tire moving in the approved direction but deploy upward if pressure comes from the opposite angle, he explained. They'll puncture any tire that drives over them against the flow, but they won't cause blowouts or create safety hazards. Just flat tires. We sell them to ranchers and private landowners all the time. I ordered 2 20-foot sections, enough to cover the main approach from the street to my lawn, where the tire tracks had been. The strips arrived 3 days later by freight delivery. While I waited, I had 3 professional warning signs made at a local print shop, each one 18 inches by 24 inches, with bold red letters on a reflective yellow background reading "Private Property, Tire Damage Prevention System Active, No Trespassing, Violators Will Be Prosecuted." I installed the signs at 3 visible points facing the street, the path where the tracks originated, and directly toward Karen's property line. Anyone approaching from any direction would see at least 1 sign before reaching the strips. I photographed each sign from multiple angles with timestamps and GPS coordinates, documenting that the warnings were impossible to miss even at night, due to the reflective material. On Monday morning, I installed the spike strips in a line across the section of lawn that connected to the path between my property and Karen's, the exact route Brandon had taken with his Tesla. The strips sat low profile against the grass, visible if you looked down but not concealed or hidden in any way, clearly part of the warning system. I tested them with an old tire from a mechanic, rolling it slowly over the strips in the wrong direction. The teeth deployed instantly, puncturing the rubber with a sharp hiss. I reset the strips and ran one more verification pass to confirm consistent function. Everything worked exactly as designed. I stepped back and reviewed my work. Everything was legal, documented, and clearly warned. If Brandon came back, if he ignored the signs and drove across my property again, he'd face consequences that no amount of social manipulation could erase. That evening, I sent a formal letter to Karen via certified mail. The letter was brief and factual. "This is to inform you that I have installed a tire damage prevention system on my private property in accordance with Texas law. Multiple warning signs are posted and visible from all approaches. Any person who trespasses on this property does so at their own risk and will be held liable for any resulting damage to their vehicle. This letter serves as additional written notice beyond the posted warnings. Further trespassing will result in criminal charges." I kept a copy for my records and noted the certified mail tracking number. The letter would arrive in 2 days. Karen would know the trap was set, and then we'd see if her son was foolish enough to test it. I sat in my living room that night, looking out the window toward the dark outline of my lawn. The cameras were recording. The signs were posted. The spike strips were armed and ready. For the first time since the tire tracks appeared, I didn't feel defensive or reactive. I felt prepared. Karen had spent weeks trying to intimidate me, turning the community against me, building social pressure to force me off my own land. But she'd made a critical miscalculation. She'd assumed I'd respond emotionally, that I'd either back down or lash out in a way she could use against me. Instead, I'd responded with patience, documentation, and the law. Everything I'd done was legal, measured, and thoroughly recorded. If Brandon came back, the cameras would capture it. The signs would prove he'd been warned, and the spike strips would deliver consequences that couldn't be explained away. I wasn't fighting Karen on her terms anymore. I was fighting on mine. The trap triggered at 2:38 a.m. on a Friday night.
exactly 11 days after I'd installed the spike strips. I was asleep when my phone buzzed with the motion alert from the security system, the notification lighting up my nightstand with a harsh glow. I grabbed it immediately, swiped to the camera feed, and felt my heart rate spike. A black Tesla was rolling slowly across my lawn. Headlights off, moving in the same path Brandon had taken the first time. The infrared cameras captured everything in stark clarity. I could see Brandon behind the wheel, his face visible through the windshield. That same cocky expression he'd worn when his mother defended him at the door. He was driving deliberately, almost casually, like he owned the place, like the warning signs I'd posted meant nothing to him. I watched the feed in real time as the Tesla's front tires rolled over the spike strips. There was a pause, maybe half a second, and then all 4 tires deflated simultaneously with sounds I could hear even through the closed bedroom window. Sharp hisses of escaping air, one after another. Rapid fire. The car lurched forward, then settled unevenly onto the rims as the tires went completely flat. Brandon hit the brakes hard, the car skidding slightly on the soft grass before coming to a stop in the middle of my lawn. I could see him through the camera, his expression shifting from confusion to anger to panic. He got out, crouched to examine the destroyed tires, then pulled out his phone and made a call. I didn't wait. I grabbed my own phone, dialed 911, and spoke calmly to the dispatcher. "This is Maxwell Thornhill at 42 Meadowbrook Lane. I have a trespasser on my property who just drove across my lawn and damaged his vehicle on a legally installed tire deterrent system. I need an officer here immediately." The dispatcher confirmed my address, told me to stay inside, and said units were en route. Less than 3 minutes later, headlights appeared in my driveway, but it wasn't the police. It was Karen's SUV, pulling up fast, parking at an angle near the street. Karen got out and rushed toward Brandon, her movements frantic, gesturing wildly as she spoke to him. Brandon pointed at the tires, then at the reflective warning signs clearly visible in the glow from the street lamp. Karen bent down to look at the spike strips, then stood up and stared directly at one of my cameras. Her face was a mixture of rage and desperation, the kind of expression someone makes when they know they've been caught but can't accept it yet. She pulled out her phone and started taking photos of everything, like she was gathering evidence for some argument she hadn't figured out yet. That's when the police arrived. 2 patrol cars pulled up with lights flashing, but no sirens, and I recognized one of the officers immediately. It was Detective Martinez, the same detective I'd filed the harassment report with 2 weeks earlier. I grabbed my tablet with all the documentation preloaded, pulled on a jacket, and headed outside. By the time I reached the lawn, Martinez was already examining the scene, looking at the spike strips and reading the warning signs. Karen saw me approaching and immediately started talking, her voice loud and accusatory. "Officer, this man set a trap for my son. This is entrapment. He deliberately put those things there to damage our vehicle." Martinez held up a hand, cutting her off. "Ma'am, I need you to stop talking and let me assess the situation." He turned to me. "Mr. Thornhill, walk me through what happened." I handed him the tablet, already cued to the timestamp. At 2:38 a.m., my security system alerted me to motion on my property. The footage shows Brandon Delacroix driving his Tesla across my lawn, which is private property, despite clearly posted warning signs about the tire damage prevention system. I have the entire incident recorded from 4 different camera angles, time-stamped and backed up to cloud storage. Martinez watched the video, his expression neutral but focused. He saw Brandon drive across the lawn, saw the tires deflate, saw him get out and call for help. Martinez handed the tablet back to me, then turned to Brandon. "Did you see the warning signs before you drove onto this property?" he asked. Brandon glanced at his mother, then muttered, "I saw them, but I didn't think he was serious. I've driven across here before. It's not like it's a real road or anything." Martinez's expression didn't change, but I saw something shift in his eyes. "So you're admitting you knowingly trespassed on private property after being warned about protective measures?" Brandon stammered. "I didn't think it was that big a deal." Martinez pulled out his notepad. "Mr. Delacroix, you're being cited for criminal trespassing. Your vehicle will need to be towed off this property at your own expense. Any damage to the lawn caused by the tow will also be your responsibility." Brandon's mouth fell open. "You're citing me. He's the one who set a trap." Martinez's voice stayed calm but firm. The tire deflation system is legal under Texas law. It's on private property with clear warning signs that you admit you saw and ignored. There's no entrapment here. You made a choice to trespass, and you're facing the consequences of that choice. Karen stepped forward, her voice rising. This is ridiculous. I'm on the HOA board. I know our rights. You can't just let him put traps on his property. Martinez turned to face her directly. Ma'am, Mr. Thornhill is not part of your HOA. His property is outside your jurisdiction. He has every legal right to protect his land. And frankly, given the harassment complaint on file and the evidence I'm seeing here tonight, you're lucky I'm not citing you as well for encouraging this trespass. Karen's face went pale, all the defiance draining from her expression. The uniformed officer had already called for a tow truck, and within 20 minutes, a flatbed arrived to haul the Tesla off my lawn. The driver winced when he saw the 4 flat tires, the rims slightly damaged from the weight of the car sitting on them. That's going to be expensive, he said to no one in particular. Brandon and Karen stood silently by the street, watching as the car was loaded up. All the fight drained out of them. Martinez handed Brandon the citation, then turned to Karen. Ma'am, I'm formally warning you that any further contact with Mr. Thornhill or his property will result in arrest. Do you understand? Karen nodded. Her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on me with pure hatred. But she didn't say anything. She couldn't. Martinez walked over to me as the tow truck pulled away. Mr. Thornhill, you did everything by the book. Keep that footage safe. If they try anything else, call me immediately. I thanked him, and he drove off, leaving me alone on my lawn as the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The spike strips had done their job. Karen's attempt to intimidate me had just backfired in the most spectacular way possible. The HOA emergency meeting happened 3 days after Brandon's citation, and I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Joe Patterson, the longtime resident who'd quietly supported me from the beginning, called me that evening and walked me through everything. The meeting had been called by 3 board members who weren't Karen, and the single agenda item was a vote of no confidence in the vice president. 72 households out of 93 had shown up, which Joe said was unprecedented. Karen had tried to control the narrative, insisting she'd been protecting community interests, that I was the real problem, but the room wasn't having it. A resident named Greg stood up, holding the police report. Karen, your son admitted he saw the warning signs and ignored them, Greg said. He was cited for trespassing on private property that was never part of our HOA. You encouraged him. You lied to us about easement rights that don't exist. Another woman, Sharon, revealed that Karen had spent nearly $3,000 of community funds on her campaign against me, all without board approval. The room erupted. When the vote was called, 68 residents voted to remove Karen from all HOA positions. 7 voted to keep her. Karen walked out without saying another word. The interim board president immediately announced new transparency policies. Several residents apologized publicly, acknowledging they'd been misled. 2 weeks later, I received a formal letter from the Meadowbrook HOA signed by Robert Hayes. On behalf of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, we formally apologize for the harassment and trespassing incidents that occurred on your property. Our former vice president acted without board approval and misrepresented the legal status of your land. We want to make clear that your property is private and entirely outside HOA jurisdiction. We respect your boundaries and your rights as a property owner. It was the closure I'd been waiting for, the formal acknowledgement that I'd been right all along. Brandon's court date came 3 weeks after the citation. Rebecca attended with me, though she barely needed to do anything. The judge reviewed the video evidence, the warning signs, and Brandon's own admission. Brandon was found guilty of criminal trespassing, fined $1,200, ordered to pay $1,800 in restitution for lawn damage, and given 6 months probation. Karen sat in the back, saying nothing. 2 months later, the Delacroix house went up for sale. They moved out quietly, just gone. I stood on my front lawn on a Saturday morning, looking at the grass that had finally recovered. The cameras were still recording. The warning signs were still posted. The lawn was green again, exactly the way my father would have wanted it. The boundary between my property and the rest of the world was clear now, not just legally, but undeniably. I'd defended what was mine not with anger or violence, but with patience, documentation, and trust in the legal system. If you're dealing with an HOA dispute or any situation where someone is trying to bully you into giving up your legal rights, remember this: document everything, stay calm, trust the process. The truth wins in the end if you're patient enough to let it. If this story resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed to Karma Clause, where we prove that boundaries matter, truth wins, and nobody gets to steal what's legally yours. Hit that subscribe button, because justice stories like this are exactly what we're here for. Thanks for watching.